The webinar includes how to structure an effective study plan for the digital SHSAT, the most important concepts and question types to focus on, time management strategies to maximize efficiency on the day of the test, common mistakes students make and how to avoid them, resources and tools that can aid in preparation, and finally, we'll end the webinar with some Q&A for personalized guidance. So to start off, Greg, let's talk about how students and parents, families can structure an effective study plan for the digital SHSAT.
Okay. Well, I think one of the first things to recognize is that the SHSAT prep as a general, as a whole, it's going to pretty much stay intact the same way that we do it now. One of the things we learned is that the DOE is going to be releasing 2 practice exams very shortly. We don't know exactly when, but when they do, there's only going to be 2. So we're going to be using some of previous techniques and ways to do that. Now, the digital exam is going to have unique differences, and we should eventually get into some of those. But prep in general is still going to be the same. You still need to make sure your prerequisites are all there at grade level, master your grade level. You're still going to need to be doing common things like reading and critical reading in specific, because the passages are a certain nature and they're a different level than, say, the New York State test or what's happening in a classroom. So that's kind of, you have to begin somewhere before you can kind of leap into the complexity and the depth of the SAT itself. So it's kind of an overview that you should really be practicing and approaching this similarly as if it was not a digital exam. At some point, you do have to add the digitization into it, but that's kind of a last step. And to be honest with you, this is how I tutor my students already, where we kind of start from the ground up and incrementally build along. And usually half of my prep, I literally don't even use SAT practice exams. So it's really about getting your core knowledge really super solid, and then building on the novelness of the SHST, the depth of the SHST, and all that kind of stuff. So, so I'll kind of stop there because there's a lot to say, but I'll just give that as the initial thought that a lot of what you're doing should stay intact.
Great points, Greg. Yes. So one of the things that a lot of families don't know about the SHSAT is that it's actually meant to assess students' understanding of the New York State Next Generation Learning Standards for 7th grade. And although there are some 8th grade concepts that sometimes appear on the SHSAT practice tests, for the most part, in order to structure a study plan for the SHSAT, you should be following the 7th grade learning standards for the 8th grade version of the SHSAT. And I'll also include a link to the actual learning standards so that families can see for themselves what those are. Also, I think it's important for families to plan or plot out a specific timeline for when your students will complete each practice test that is available, and also make sure to plan out time to review those practice tests. I would say that it's actually much more important that you carefully study your mistakes when you do complete practice tests, and less so the importance of completing many practice tests. It's more about quality over quantity. From the student's perspective, it's also important that they tell an adult what exactly their study plan will be like, what that timeline looks like, so that they can have that adult help them stay accountable. I also suggest that students take some time to explore the student readiness tool that was provided by the DOE recently on the SHSAT webpage. So I'll include first the SHSAT webpage in the chat for everyone. And the second link that I'll share is the link to the SHSAT student readiness tool. And I think, Greg, you'll probably go through that tool with us later in the webinar, right?
Sure.
Okay. Because I know you sort of became an expert on all the nuances of the SRT after exploring it for a while.
Yes, unfortunately, I spent too much time with it. Um, yeah, so just to kind of add to what Kenny's saying, I think there's a big point here that this is the SHSAT, except for the grammar part, is core knowledge information, and it's not extra stuff. The SHSAT is a middle school exam for middle school students, and that means it's following middle school standards. There's a lot of students and families who insist that it's including topics and concepts, say, from Algebra 1. And even though grade 8 and grade 7 algebra overlaps with the Algebra 1 class, which is a ninth grade class, it's only the overlap that you're seeing, right? But the SHSAT is a middle school proficiency exam. It's not a high school exam. It's not college. So if you pick up the link Kenny gave to the New York State standards, that's what we're looking for, nothing more, right? So if a lot of students are over prepping for the SHSAT. They're trying to master all of Algebra 1, and all of Algebra 1 is not on the SHSAT. It's theoretically not even part of the SHSAT. So that is critical to do. Yes, and on the note of the SRT, the student resource tool, which the DOE is providing everybody. Kenny, did you get the master link to where yeah, you did. Okay. To the DOE's general FAQ site now for the digital exam. Everybody should go through the SRT yourself. The exam might be the exam we know and love, so to speak, but there is going to be slight digitized differences. And even if there wasn't, you still need to get used to the platform and the tools that it has and things like that, because you don't want to walk into the exam being, masterful in math, but not knowing what to do when you get on the computer, right? So there's going to be a learning curve there about that too. And while we can say, why didn't the DOE release online exams and all this other stuff? That's a good question, but at the same time, there's information out there that we can get to right now. And now is the time to be looking at that stuff. So when they do finally release the exams, that that's not going to be an issue anymore.
Thanks, Greg. So the next part that we were going to talk about is important concepts and question types to focus on. And we sort of already touched on that by mentioning the 7th grade learning standards that the 8th grade SHSAT is based on. Also, I do want to point out that in my conversation with the executive director at the Office of Assessment, one of my questions for him was whether specifically questions such as these shape transformation questions will be part of the 8th grade SHSAT. And you'll notice that in the released document, in the document that they released, showing samples of these TEIs, that their last page or the last 2 pages of the document show us solution set questions where you'll have to graph the space in between 2 inequalities. These are specifically 9th grade level problems that will only appear in the 9th grade version of the SHSAT. However, they do not designate shape transformations as 9th grade only. So that sort of implies to me that shape transformations, even though they are a part of the 8th grade learning standards, they may appear on the 8th grade SHSAT as well. I specifically asked Michael Ryan, the executive director of the Office of Assessment, if we will see shape transformations. He wasn't definitive on that, but he left open the possibility. And certainly these TEI sample items, they're not all encompassing. If you actually go to the Pearson TestNav interface documentation, there's dozens and dozens of possible TEIs that they could generate in the future for future SHSAT administrations. So I think it is important to point out, though, that on the paper and pencil SHSAT, we've been used to dealing with only multiple choice and grid and response questions. And now with the digital SHSAT, we're going to encounter drag and drop questions, fill in the blank questions, hotspot questions. So for example, here you'll have to highlight multiple answer choices at multiple answers in order to get the correct answer. There's the equation editor feature where you'll enter an expression or possibly an equation as your answer. There's the hot text where you'll have to highlight words in a sentence or maybe even a paragraph. There's also the inline choice, which is sort of just more drag or drop down menu questions. There are the multiple response questions where you'll need to select multiple responses in order to get credit for that question. There are these table grid questions. There are point graph questions where you may have to graph a polygon on the XY coordinate plane. And as we mentioned earlier, shape transformation and solution set questions. Greg, do you want to add on to that, or shall we?
Yeah, maybe two quick notes. The first is that Kenny posted a link to schools.nyc.gov/learning-whatever. Within that URL, this document Kenny is showing is linked there. It's a PDF. So if you look through that thing, there's a thing talking about TEIs, and that's the second part. TEI is a tech enhanced item. So a question is basically an item, and tech enhanced just means there's going to be new formats of questions that the DOE or Pearson is going to be adding to the exam. So it's no longer just going to be multiple choice and grid-ins. There's going to be other opportunities, including on the ELA section. So it doesn't mean the test changes per se, but it is going to present a slightly different style of thinking of how to answer some questions. But it's going to be kind of the leap between a multiple choice question and a grid in now. They could be the same question. You could still be asking about the same math concept, but the way to approach the question with the multiple choice or without it, if it's grid in, is slightly different. And there's different ways to address that. So what we're going to have is a kind of a new flavor of that on top of it. So the TEI, the tech enhanced item, is the thing Kenny just talked about. Multiple choice, multiple response, point graph, drop down menus, all that kind of stuff. Those are all the TEIs he just showed you. So that's new language we're going to have to kind of get used to. There's also something I'm calling a TEF, which is a tech enhanced feature. That's what the SRT describes. Again, the link to the SRT is also in that link Kenny gave before. So the main link has two other links to it. One is the PDF, and the other is the SRT, which is a tutorial platform to kind of get used to what the digitized platform is going to pretty closely look like.
Okay, so the next part that we were going to discuss is time management strategies to maximize efficiency on the day of the test. Greg, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think the first is to start your time management strategy before the day of the test. One of the things that I find that happens is a student gets lost on test day. I like to say this ain't nothing like test day. It's a unique experience no matter how much you practice. And you really do need to get your time management situations figured out. How are you going to approach the test on test day? Which means before test day, you have to start doing that and seeing what works for you. For some people, starting the ELA section makes sense. For some people, starting the grid-in section makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. You also want to be timing yourself, all right? One of the main issues with the exam is pacing. And it's hard to do. So the only way to do it is to be practicing pacing as well. So basically, when you start preparing, when you finally get to that, you're doing SAT questions, I think first and foremost, you should be just trying to get them correct, no matter how long it takes you. All right, but at some point, efficiency has to kick in. The exam's 3 hours. You have accommodations. Some students get 6 hours. At some point in time, the test ends, right? You have to be finished. What you also want to be combating is being tired, even daydreaming, getting exhausted, and all this kind of stuff like that. So you kind of have to have a game plan going into the exam and sticking to the game plan. So for as many students who don't even have a game plan, the students have a game plan, and on test day, they just throw it out the window. They don't follow the game plan. So that's part of it. So, and if it means right now, not particularly on test day, but if you can't get through a full exam, try to do a half exam. If you can't do a half exam, do half of one section. Just do as much as you can for now. And it's part of like anything. You have to build up your rigor, build up your stamina, and all that stuff. And it's all happening simultaneously. So, and even just by trying to get the questions correct, as you're getting used to the formatted exam and what you need to do to answer these deep questions, you're actually getting more efficient at it as well. All right. So all that has to happen simultaneously, but you do need to do conscious stuff for the pacing as well. One is alternate solutions as well. It might say if you do an alternate solution, you're taking longer. You are, but if you can optimize both of the alternate solutions, sometimes you can get that done faster than a longer, slower solution. A lot of problems can be solved through logic. You're still doing math, and you're not cheating or anything like that. But there's an alternate way that you might be able to do in 30 seconds once you understand the concept that you're being asked. You can do that. Sometimes the arithmetic part, once you get the concept, just clicks in, right? So there's things like that you could do as well. So, but it's important to get finished before the exam. And what we also want to consider is, well, with the paper-based exam, you got to include bubbling time, right? So there's no longer bubbling time, but you can have navigation time. You're going to be navigating back and forth with the exam, right? The other thing you may want to consider is, going to the bathroom might take 5 or 10 minutes. So a 3-hour exam is not a 3-hour exam. It's less than that. So you're trying to shoot for 2.5 hours and just wiggle around that. And what you also want to do is layer the exam. There's this notion of what's called doing the easy exam first, doing the easy test first. Which is you're going to do the ones you're sure you can get, and then you can add the complexity on the ones you're not sure about, and just build up. And then there's also just general strategies, like if you're totally stuck, use process of elimination and kind of things like that. So there's tons we could say about this, but that's 5 or 6 things right there. But pacing is critical, timing is critical, and if you ignore it, you're going to jeopardize your situation.
Thanks, Greg. So just to add on to the points that you made, I would also recommend that students start with the section that they know they're going to be the best at. With the way that the test itself is curved, and of course families should understand that the curve actually benefits students that are very strong in one area more than the students that are about equal in the two across the two sections, the ELA and the math sections, because the ELA and the math sections are scored separately, and at the tail ends of the score curve, every extra question that you get correct could add anywhere between 10 to 20 more points to your final score. But when you're in the middle of that score curve, getting one more question correct may only add 3 or 4 more points to your total score. So if you know that you have a good chance of getting a close to perfect score in, say, the math section, then it really helps for you to try to get that perfect score, perfect raw score in the math section, because that could mean up to 350 points on that section. And the test itself is usually scored out of a maximum of around 700 points. So, and as Greg said, if you get stuck on a problem, or if you don't know how to start a problem, just go ahead and skip it and come back to it at the end. I find that a lot of students, at least when they start taking practice tests, they run out of time, and that's because they're not used to taking 3-hour tests with a strict time limit. A lot of these state exams in school, they don't really have strict time limits. So students who are preparing for the SHSAT, it's like training for a marathon. You need to sort of complete intensive interval training, so to speak, in order to build up to that point where you can complete an entire test from beginning to end in 3 hours. All right, so common mistakes students make and how to avoid them. Greg, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I'm breaking up here, so I'm not sure. Let me try to, I might have to disconnect and come back in. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's fine. I'll go ahead and I'll let you rejoin. All right, so my first point here is about careless mistakes. Students oftentimes fall victim to careless mistakes because they're not showing their work for those math problems. They're making silly arithmetic mistakes if they're doing the math in their head, but if they actually write down the work and allow themselves to be able to go back and check their work later on, they can easily spot those silly arithmetic mistakes. So that's my first point. Show your work whenever possible. I know it's going to take some extra time to write down your work, but at least that will allow you to make sure you can actually check your answers when you get to the end of the test. Secondly, I find a lot of students also end up misreading questions. So I encourage students to practice good decision hygiene. And part of that is to actually read the question a second time after they've chosen their answer before moving on to the next question. Thirdly, I find that students also tend to rush through passages especially when they're just starting to do mock practice tests. So I encourage students to annotate the passages as they're reading them. So that forces them to slow down and process what they're actually reading instead of just allowing the words to skip through their field of vision. Part of the annotation process is underlining key ideas, such as the author's thesis statement in a nonfiction passage, trying to understand what is the purpose of each body paragraph as it relates to the central idea of the passage. Also, a tip for when students get stuck between two answer choices that both seem equally good. Instead of settling for the answer choice that just seems to be the better answer, I encourage students to figure out exactly why one of those answers is incorrect from the point of view of the test writers. Keep in mind that out of the 4 answer choices, there's always going to be a reason why 3 of the answer choices are incorrect. You may not agree with that reason, but you should at least try to see it from the point of view of the question writer, the test writers, and put yourself in their shoes, try to understand why an answer choice might be incorrect, possibly because it uses extreme language, or if it's a misinterpretation of what the passage says. Sometimes it's an outright contradiction to what the passage may say. And along those same lines, when you are using process of elimination, I encourage you to use the feature on the digital SHSAT interface that allows you to cross off the entire answer choice. But only cross off an answer choice when you have identified the part of the passage that clearly contradicts that answer choice. I also find that students often read through an answer choice the first time, say to themselves, oh, that doesn't sound right, and then they stop considering that answer for the rest of the question. Instead of doing that, you should be able to point to a specific line number or a specific paragraph or sentence that proves that that answer choice is incorrect. Greg, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I'm back, not breaking up anymore. Sure. The process of elimination is really important on the ELA section. I find that knowing what main idea is a key critical component, even if it's not directly a main idea question. So out of maybe 8 to 10 questions per passage, one of them straight up going to be a main idea question, and 3 or 4 other ones are indirectly going to be main idea questions. So getting your literacy figured out is super important as well. And then, so Kenny's presenting a really classic situation where a lot of students can get rid of, out of the 4 choices, they can get rid of 2 of them. That's reasonable. And then there's 2 they don't know how to tie break. Okay, so I call that hair splitting and intense mental negotiation, right? But sometimes it doesn't need to be as bad as that because there's sometimes it's the wording. So it's a reading comprehension section. And I consider that there's 3 parts where reading comprehension is. One is the passage. We know we have to read it, we have to understand it. The other is the question you also have to comprehend. And every choice you need to comprehend. So as much as students try to focus and somehow inadvertently you start wasting time at the actual raw passage, they take the question and the choices kind of for granted. And they're just as important for the comprehension of what you're being asked to do. So what it comes down to is there's certain words in the question and certain words in the choices that can help the tiebreak. So for instance, if something says like, almost every day, Kenny and Greg do a webinar, and the answer says, every day Kenny and Greg do a webinar. Well, that's not what the passage said. It said almost every day, right? So that little difference can matter. And those, by the way, those are called all or never words. That's one way to tiebreak it. But there's also, they might use slightly different vocabulary. The paraphrasing might not paraphrase exactly what the original thing said. And sometimes you have to do multiple things with paraphrasing and inferencing. And again, the inferencing gets back to the main idea indirectly. So all these are connected. And one of the things I do with my students is that we back off of SAT passages, and we actually figure out main idea and things like that with one paragraph. Because if you jump deep way in, you can get lost, and it could be spread all over the place. So if you could start getting them at one paragraph passages, and that's hard, by the way. I can give students 20 paragraphs, and probably nobody can get 10 of them right? So you don't want to bite-size these guys off and your learning process, right? You don't want to wait till test day to figure this out. There's a lot of people who think, oh, you just guess it, right? The SHSAT is not about guessing. The answer's there, and you just have to find it, right? So, and then you have to use what Kenny's saying. You must be annotating somehow. You must be keeping track of what the passage is telling you, right? Without getting bogged down at the same time. You can get so into the minutia of what the author's saying that you're starting to memorize stuff that is never going to be a question, right? So you need to figure, you're going to still get a summary. You still have to figure out the plot and all that stuff like that. But the question may not ever ask you about that. So there's a balance that has to happen. Now, by the way, some students are able to read the questions first and then go back to the passage. But I find the majority of students can't do that. But you should give it a whirl. And when you give some of these things a whirl, it doesn't mean doing it once or twice, because that's often not enough to make sure it works for you or not, right? So you have to maybe do it 10 times or something. You have to remember in these exams, you're overloading your short-term memory with all the math questions, all the passages, all the ELA questions, the grammar. Your brain's going crazy at that point, and you need somehow to bring it, to a quiescent point to be able to be coherent to get these things. And it's logical. This is a thinking exam. Kenny was touching on this earlier. The SHSAT is mainly a thinking exam, and everything else cascades from that. So if you approach it that way, if you have to tie break something, there is a reason. The passage gives the reason why one answer is better than the other, right? It's a little slippery, like it's better. Yeah, 2 answers could be true and even slightly correct, but one is going to be exactly what they're looking for, and you have to tap into that. And don't position yourself just as a test taker. Start thinking of the concepts they're testing you on, and position yourself actually as a test writer as well, right?
So the next part that we were going to discuss was resources and tools that can aid students in preparation. So just a couple of resources that come to mind right now for me are websites like Khanacademny, IXL, the directory of the official practice tests from past years, which you can find on one of my web pages. I'll include that in the chat right now, actually, so families can bookmark that one as well. And there are a couple good textbooks out there. Greg, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll drop. I have a link to my site too, so let me throw that on here with a whole bunch of like sublinks to it as well. Let's see, where's the chat? And then obviously the workbooks are important. What I find too is a lot of students get the workbooks, and you might have like a 600-page workbook, and they skip the review section because they say, quote, I know that, right? And it turns out a lot of students don't know it. So you should be reviewing your material. This goes back to what I said earlier about starting out. You should be doing prerequisites and grade level mastery, which is why the link to the stanzas is important and stuff like that. But they have review section, they have drill down questions, and then it's the full practice exams. You should be doing all of that as part of what you're doing. And then there's standard questions like, what's the best book to buy? There's a lot of standard books like Princeton Review, Kaplan, Barron's, Tutorverse. Kenny has a great poetry book. There's, Queller has a nice SAT book. And then there's 9 specific books too. So, and on that note, because I don't know how much we're going to focus on it, but the SSAT 9 is a superset of the SSAT 8. So on that note, there's basically only 2 really 9 books, which is Andrew Kim's SHSAT 9 Math and Bobby Tarrick's SHSAT 9 Math. Bobby Tarrick goes beyond the SHSAT, so he has great questions, but there's additional questions. So I'm not quite sure about that. And by the way, on a side note, there's enough SHSAT material to prep for it forever. All right, so there's not really a good reason to use other exams. Maybe 30 years ago that was true, but now there's enough, at least minimally reasonable workbooks that you guys should be using. Anyway, just to kind of conclude on the book thing, I personally end with the Tutorverse book. I use multiple third-party workbooks. Some of them I just said. I use Tutorverse as the last one. After that, we use the DOE handbooks, which Kenny gave a link to his site. I have a link on mine too. And then what you're gonna have to add this year is the online exams that they're gonna provide to us. All right, Kenny and I haven't seen that yet, and I don't think anybody beyond the DOE has seen that. So, so we hope we can get to see that early. On that same note, once the DOE releases the practice exam, or the 2 of them, I think what we need to do, everybody, both me and Kenny as tutors, but also students and families, is look at it, not particularly do the exam. Look at it, because if you jump in and do those 2 exams first, that's it. You don't get to do them a second time. I mean, you can, but you're already gonna be familiar with them, right? So I'm personally gonna wait for that to, first of all, to at least see what the 2 exams they give us, what they look like are, right? And then decide whether I'm gonna give it to my students early on or later on. But my mentality right now is to give it to them later on. Plus, at that point, we'll have whittled through all the core requirements. We whittle through the SAT specifics. And then we're ready to get into full practice exams, including the online ones, right? Remember, the underlying concepts and topics, they're not changing. It's just some of the question styles might change. So the TEIs that Kenny showed you before, it's the same underlying concept, right? He gave you the link to the standards. The standards are not changing. They're not getting more, they're not getting less. It's the same standard, maybe just slightly different flavors of questioning.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so we have some questions in the Q&A that I just want to answer for everyone. First of all, will this webinar be recorded or posted later? Yes, we are currently recording the webinar, and we'll be posting a recording of it, hopefully in the Applying to High Schools Facebook group in a few days. And I'll be sending it out through my mailing list as well. And if you've registered for tonight's webinar, I'll make sure that you get an email with the recording. Secondly, or the next question here is, will students be able to skip around with the digital test? And I can say that for this year's digital test, yes, students will be able to skip around. As far as how students will be able to skip around with next year's, the 2026 version of the SHSAT, that's a little bit more nuanced. So basically with the 2026 version, students will be able to skip around within a single passage, but they won't be able to skip back and forth between passages. And they will be able to, it's actually not clear yet exactly how students will be able to jump back and forth between the 2 sections. If students will be able to start with, let's say, the math section or the reading part, instead of starting with the revising and editing, which is typically which has always been the standard beginning of the test. So We have to wait and see exactly how the DOE is going to decide what the functionality will be like for as far as skipping around for the 2026 version of the SHSAT. But I can tell you now that for the 2025 version, students will definitely be able to skip back and forth across the sections and between all the questions. So yes, students will also be able to go back and check their answers and change their answers for this year's test. As far as the 2026 version, students will have a limited ability to go back and change their answers. Let's see, is there a way for students to keep track of the questions they skip and we'll come back to? Yes, and actually I'm going to share my screen here again with the SRT to show the attendees how we can do that. You'll notice that part of the SRT has a menu which will allow students to jump across the entire list of questions that they have access to at any point in the test. Students can also click on a specific question and bookmark it using this bookmark feature. Once they click on that button, it pops up on the menu, drop-down menu here as being bookmarked. They also have the ability to filter just the bookmarks by clicking on the bookmarks button here. And while we're on this, Greg, are there any specific things in the SRT that you want to point out that may help families that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, I think the navigation is everybody's question. So just summarizing again what Kenny said and what's going to be there for sure. You can go back and forward. Also, at the end of the exam, it's going to give you a summary of your questions. You can also still go back. There's a final submit request that it's eventually going to give you, right? And you could still, if you don't want to commit to that, you can still go back to it. It also might show you questions out. I'm not exactly sure, but that's my understanding. And you can bookmark questions, unbookmark them. You can also just go back to if you want. You don't have to do the drop down. So show the eliminator, Kenny, because I see you have three.
Right. The answer eliminator is this button right here. So you have to click on the button first to enable the feature. Then you click on each answer choice you want to cross off, and it will cross off the entire answer choice as you wish.
Right, and that's naive, but it's exactly what you do with your pencil. So it's trivial. It's supporting your test taking process, and what happens with some of the tools that you can use is they persist on a question. So especially on the 2025 version where you can go back and forth, if you answer a question and then go to the next one, come back, it remembers where you are. All right. Probably the second biggest feature after that is the notepad, which lets you take notes. And by the way, somebody was asking in the Q&A part, where was that? How do they annotate on the digital exam? This is one way. So there will be a notepad, and part of the notepad includes a pencil feature. By the way, students will get scrap paper. All right, so they can do things on paper, but we're talking about the screen. What you can do is get the question kind of fitting into the notepad. It's not showing, well, yeah, this is the SRT, which is kind of modeling the testing environment platform. But when you notepad a question, and we're not going to be able to show you here because the SRT is not set up for that. But when you notepad a question, it includes the question inside the notepad, right? So that way you can annotate over it, right? Including solving a math question. Now, one of the issues on the table is, well, that implies students are going to have a mouse or a stylus or something like that. That is still not a known thing. I asked the DOE specifically about that, and they said they're not even sure everybody will have a mouse. So I hope they do, and I hope they're able to do the annotations that way. I also tried to push from some ergonomic additions or modifications to the platform. I don't know if that's possible, but there's a few ergonomic things I think that could be done to enhance the student experience, right? These are 13-year-olds taking a hard exam, and we shouldn't have anything in the computer/digital process that's going to hinder the student, right? It's a timed exam, so we don't want buttons and features that are lagging or just awkward to use, or a student doesn't know what to do at all, right? But again, this is another reason, even if it's all glorious, to to sit down with the SRT, spend at least an hour on it now, right? And then come back to it if you need to, right? And once the platform's there, you can just go use it for a while to abandon at that point, even without answering the questions, just to get used to it. There's a lot of features there. There are going to be features also for students with accommodations, like that left-hand side that Kenny's, see the play button and so on. There's a text-to-speech feature for students with accommodations.
You
There's
may see
also,
big trick.
there's right. So it'll read everything for you if that's the permission. That's going to be done on a per student situation based on your IEP or your 504. There's also things like a magnifying glass if you want to zoom into anything. In addition to the eliminator tool, there's also another tool which lets you, I forget the term they're using. Is it called the line? Yeah, the line, what is that called? The line what?
Line reader mask.
The line reader mask. And I remember doing this in first, second, and third grade, not on a computer, but on a projector. So it's a way of focusing. And Kenny, too, you can drop down the open window part too, right? Just drag that so they can see that moves. Not the whole box, but the actual open space there. See the little arrow in the middle of it? Yeah. No, the other one. Inside, right there. And you could, and if you go in the corner, you can make it bigger. Right? So the student has full control of that. And again, it's persisting. You can go to the question and come back to it, or you could bring it and disable it. And a lot of the tools, you see where it says guest user. So that's where Kenny's getting these from. If you click on that. Now, I think that's not natural. So I'm suggesting to DOE take those drop downs right there and put them next to the other three in the center. There's an X and a little, the notepad thing in the middle, and just make a toolbar. There's no reason to click on your name to get extra features. They're also implying that to turn it off, you have to go back up to the drop down and disable it. There should be a way to X out of some of these things. A few of them, I think the magnifying glass has a way to X out of it, but not all of them do. So I'm trying to fight for you guys to get them to, again, this is ergonomics. This is the design. Or something like there's a glossary as well. The glossary is going to be twofold. One is glossary just for things like normally when you read a passage, there might be a little footnote and you look at the bottom of the page of the footnote. So there's going to be a glossary for that. There's also going to be a glossary for ELL students. So because normally with the paper-based exam, they're provided glossaries of technical terms and stuff like that. So that's also going to be incorporated, built into the digital exam. And again, some of those would be set based on the student situation. There'll also be an equation editor in the math. That might be a pseudo-complicated thing. At the same time, some of you might be going, oh no. But you have to remember, your students, almost all are using something like iReady already, which already has these things in it. Maybe not exactly the same, but these are not, you might consider this high tech or whatever, but Pearson is doing nothing really out of the ordinary with these extra tools. So, and they're nice. And we could just do stuff like, so there's a couple of questions I asked them about the equation that I'm still waiting for the answer for, but so for instance, Kenny, click on the exponent one. Right, so if you guys see, it fills in the white space box, so you can put something like 5 squared there. Right, and that would be your answer. So it might say, write your answer as an exponent. Right, that's different. And by the way, that's a difference with maybe how the multiple choice works. Because normally you might be inclined, let's say it was a grid in. You can't, with the paper-based exam, you can't put 5 squared. You have to put 25. So I was saying earlier, there will be, even though the content, the topics are the same, the way they're asking you to answer the question might morph. Now, we don't know how much the morphing is going to take place, but that's a critical component. So let me see. Is there any other, let's see, it's the bookmark, the navigation. Again, we don't know how to cross sections. I explicitly asked the DOE that, and I don't know that I got the answer to it. And this SRT, as much as it's mimicking the platform, it's my understanding, it's not exactly the platform. So it's going to be close, but not exactly close. Because I kind of got two comments. One was that it was the SRT for the SHSAT, and then when I asked other questions, it was like, well, it's not going to be exactly that. So anyway, it gives a good flavor. There will be all those tools and more of them. We didn't talk about all the tools. But it's going to be feature rich, and as people use the online platform when they finally release the two practice exams, please contact Kenny and I. I think we're seem to be the two people on top of this, and we're going to stay on top of it. So if there's any idiosyncrasies and nuances, please contact us. We're not hiding in a hole. So, and we're here. We want this to be a smooth process, and just make sure everybody is comfortable and up to date and things like that. There is a Q&A question here about the 9th grade exam prep step. I meant to ask the DOE that, and I forgot. I also meant to ask them if there's going to be a practice, an extra practice written section. Okay, and the issue of a DOE handbook may or may not exist. I asked them that explicitly, and they didn't know yet. So we don't know exactly what they're going to give us on the platform, and also not on the platform. In other words, PDFs and things like that. And a question that comes up every time this platform is discussed is, well, what about students with IEPs or 504s? So there will still be a paper-based exam for certain students. I don't know how many students that will be, but the DOE, that's up to the family and the DOE. But there is still going to be paper-based exams for students with, extenuating circumstances. So that's something that Kenny and I can't answer. That has to be between you and the DOE. There's private information on top of it. So
I will add to that question about the 9th grade digital practice tests. The DOE has never released full-length 9th grade SHSAT practice tests, and I highly doubt that they will with this switch over to the digital format. The only thing that they have released for the 9th grade SHSAT in the past is a small packet of math questions that are specifically meant to just provide a sample of what the 9th grade content is like on the test. So I expect that's probably what we'll see again for the 9th grade students. Also, just to go down the list of Q&A questions again, one of these questions is, will the reading passages be shorter than the paper version, similar to what was done with the SAT? And no, we know at this point that the passages will be the same length as they have appeared in the past on the SHSAT.
And they will also model the same scenario. So for instance, the SAT or the New York State exam, you might read two passages and compare them. Nothing like that's going to happen on the SSAT. So it's a passage with certain questions, and that's the model they're going to stick with, the passage things.
Another question is, would students have the possibility to use paper to show their work since the test is digital this year? And the answer to that is yes, definitely. Students will be given scrap paper for the test. In fact, the executive director of the Office of Assessment made a joke to Greg the other day about how he was going to get the scrap paper from some other company in the same building that he was working in. Let's see here. Will the students get their scores as soon as the test is over? No, the scores will be released at the same time that regular high school offers are released, which is usually around March, as it was this year.
Right. So we have to make note that because they did recently, the past 6 years or something, they do SHSAT-based schools and not non-SHSAT schools simultaneously, that you have to still wait for the auditions to happen, for essays to be read, and all that kind of stuff like that. So even though technically they should be grading it faster, I think the DOE gets maybe a little too much diss for this, but there's vetting and a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to occur, especially when it was paper-based exams with the Scantron. So you might say, well, there's a computer now, there's no Scantron. No, that's true, but there's 28,000 testers, and no matter how you slice this is no picnic. I've been involved with doing computer. Used to be a computer programmer, and part of that was specifically I was doing coding for schools, including registrations and all this other stuff. and you wouldn't believe how things could go bad. All right, so there's more behind the scenes, and so I think it's right that the DOE has some wiggle room. Maybe March something is too late, but don't expect it 2 days later. It's still going to take a few months. That's the end of that. There's I don't know really a way to get that more efficient on their end, not by magnitudes or anything like that. So.
Let's see, another question that someone had is how many questions will there be in the ELA and math sections? So for this year's test, the 2025 SHSAT, the number of questions remains the same. So 57 math questions and 57 ELA questions. As far as the 2026 version and beyond, that has yet to be determined.
Yeah, so if you go into the chat, the very first link Kenny gave was a link to an FAQ from the DOE and themselves. So there's a lot of common questions being answered in that, including how the exam is going to be broken down and things like that. And that's going to be the same, by the way. Kenny indirectly touched on this before, but the same sections are going to be at this. So we're going to be revising it in A, still going to be revising it in B, still reading comprehension. However, there's no longer going to be a grid-in section. It's going to be intermixed into the multiple choice questions, and there's no longer grid-in question category. It's called fill in the blank. All right, so that was the example before Kenny did the 5 squared. That was indirectly demonstrating that as well. So there's no longer a special 5-section question section called grid-ins. I don't know how many of those they're going to have to fill in the blanks, but they're going to be integrated randomly into the multiple choice section. So therefore, it's no longer a multiple choice question, right? Because there's other TEIs as well, right? So we can only call it the math section now, right? Because they're not all going to be multiple choice questions.
Let's see, another question is what device will the SHSAT be taken on? And Greg, do you want to field this one?
Yeah, so the test is only going to be taken at DOE locations, which means there's going to be the school day test for 8th graders for the DOE, and then there's going to be at 5 or 6 other days for other students. No matter what location the student takes it at, it has to be a DOE location, and it'll only be using DOE computers. The majority of DOE computers are Chromebooks. They're known to be sufficient to do this. They are low-end computers and so on, but they do have a test suite, if you will, that they're going to be running on each computer to see if it's okay to be run. And just that piggybacks on the issue of security. The test will be secure. It might even be more secure than the paper-based exam was. The paper-based exam had to be express mailed to locations, and you could snag a copy if you wanted to. I don't know that anybody ever did that, but so cheating was always an issue. Yeah, so I got lost on the question. What was the question again?
Let's see. I'm just going back to my other tab here. Oh, what device is the test going to be taken?
Oh, so it's mostly going to be Chromebooks, and when you think about it, so there's going to be, even though the SRT is being presented as a browser, the actual exam, from my understanding, is going to be running through a proprietary app. Okay, so it'll look the same, but it's not going to be the browser. Anyway, it's going to lock down the computer, and it's going to be a safe exam to use. And the compute power of the Chromebook is going to be sufficient. So in addition to checking through, scanning the Chromebook, it's going to make sure it has enough memory, that the battery is reasonable, all these kind of things like that. So, and there should be really no, from that perspective, there should be really no technology issue in terms of the device. They will also be using some things like iPads or whatever as well. I don't believe they're going to be using any Android, no Linux, no Unix. So it's going to be strictly the Chromebooks. I don't know which manufacturer, and I believe just iPads. All right, so they need to get that matching as well. You may also say the iPad is not powerful enough. It's just running these questions, right? So there's not a lot of compute power being demanded on the devices. And again, it's still up in the air whether a mouse or a stylus is involved. I do believe he said you will not be able to pinch and stretch the screen doing the natural zoom. And by the way, that was another feature on the SRT. There was multiple ways to zoom the screen. So you can do that normally through your browser. So that will be true whether it's an iPad or the Chromebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the features are going to be there. And I don't think anybody's going to be at a disadvantage by running a Chromebook.
So the next question I see here is, when is the DOE planning to provide additional insight and sample tests? So the last we heard from the Office of Assessment is that 2 practice tests may be released this month, and that's as precise as we got, basically. So we're hoping that they are released by the end of the month, but they might not be. We do know for sure that it will just be 2 practice tests for the visual SHSAT. And we also know that a lot of those questions are not going to be questions we haven't seen before. They are planning to reuse a lot of the material from old practice tests that were released from years ago. And so don't expect a lot of new passages that we haven't seen before on the old practice tests or anything like that.
And again, to hit that SRT home, especially if it's going to be something familiar, get familiar with what the SRT is showing, right? The SRT is a tutorial. So run through the tutorial more than once. I ran through it maybe 10 times, and each time I found like, oh, that's interesting. So it's something that needs to be done. And it means do it for yourself, even if you have a tutor, spend the hour sitting down with it to figure it out.
Let's see, I see another question here is, do students have to transfer what's on the scrap paper to the digital test? Well, basically, students will be choosing their answers on the computer or device that they're using. So whatever they write on the scrap paper is not going to count towards their score.
Right, so with the paper-based exam, the only thing that really mattered was the bubble sheet. They collect everything. They would give you the booklet, a Scantron sheet, and extra scrap paper if you ask for it. But normally you're working out the problems within the space of the question. So the DOE would collect it, but never grade that part of it. So this is still going to be the same. They're going to give you scrap paper. They're still going to collect it. They're only going to look at it in case of cheating or something like that. But otherwise, they're only going to look at the digitized exam answers that got sent to them. And yeah, and so if you do computation and the answer's 5 and you see 5 on B, then you click B. If it's a fill in the blank question and the answer's 5, then you would type 5 with that equation that was shown before.
All right. So another question here is it still worth doing the paper practice tests since grading questions will no longer be part of the digital test? Absolutely. You should use as many of the old official paper practice tests as possible in your study plan. In fact, the executive director at the Office of Assessment told me that if he were a student preparing for the computer adaptive SHSAT, which is the 2026 SHSAT, what he would do is he would use all of those paper practice tests and try to answer the questions without skipping ahead, because you have very limited ability to skip between questions on that computer adaptive version in 2026.
Yeah, for sure. So if we kind of summarize everything both Ken and I just set up until this point, nothing you do right now for the paper-based exam, you should not throw away. Keep all your workbooks, keep all the DOE handbooks from the past, and even prep that way. This is your progression through the exam. This is your journey. So you have to start with the paper-based exams first. Now, if there was like 50 online exams, would that still come into play? Probably not as much, right? Because this is what was true with the SAT. When the SAT first went digital, there was lack of resources, and you kind of were trapped on it. So I wouldn't go so far as to say we're trapped. There is, I don't know how many unique exams. So there's about 16 unique exams from the DOE, and none of that's going away. All right. And you have to remember that when the online platform, the 2 exams for that come, every question is not going to be this computer mecha thing that is just, all over the place. It's just, so a lot of the questions are just going to be multiple choice, right? Everyone's not going to be TEI. In fact, that's one of the things up in the sky here. It might be there's only 5 TEIs in each section. and it's just the same comfortable exam we know, except it's on a computer. They do expect to keep adding more TEIs year after year after year. So they might just start with 5. I'm just making a random number here. So the exam is still going to be what you know and you love. All right.
Let's see, we have a question here from someone who's asking whether students taking the 2026 exam will see different questions than other students, I suppose, sitting around them. And yes, because it's going to be an adaptive test, if students get, let's say, the first set of questions incorrect, then they may end up being tracked to an easier set of questions on the next part of the test. And if they get the first set of questions correct, they may get tracked to a harder set of questions later on in the test. It's still considered a standardized test because you are testing students on a specific set of standards that are known ahead of time. But there are going to be many different versions of the test that students could possibly get because of its adaptive nature. I also see here there's a couple questions about when the test will be. And usually the test dates are not announced until a few weeks before the test itself. And so registration usually only opens a few weeks before the test itself. In the past, it's been around the end of October for 8th graders attending public schools, sometime in the middle of November for students that are taking it with accommodations, or students that are taking it as a 9th grader, or students that attend non-public schools. Let's see here. So see what are the questions we have.
Yeah, so while Kenny's doing that, I'm just skimming through some of the links we posted. So another link would be Delta Math too for that side of things. Kenny gives IXL and Khanacademny and so on, but there's also Delta Math. And there's others, but those are the kind of the top 3.
So we have a question here asking if it's a good strategy to study the old paper tests, the old paper practice tests, and then take the 2 digital practice tests, since those are the only digital ones we'll have available to us. I think, Greg, you sort of answered this earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically you want to save those digital practice tests for the later part of your study plan. And we will release an analysis of the digital practice tests once they're available, and we'll actually go through each question and explain whether or not that question is actually a new question that we haven't ever seen before, or whether it's just an old question from an old practice test that's been reformatted slightly. Let's see. So let's see. Someone asked about Khan Academy, Delta Math, and IXL. Yeah, that's our 3rd recommendation, IXL.com. And again, I'll put the link to the IXL standards or their web pages that list the standards for 7th grade ELA and math.
Yeah, by the way, even though some of these sites are pay-for sites, they also have a version that has content that you can, at least they used to have content that you can just click on and get. So even though they're paid for, you can also just click on them just being on the internet. Some parts of it.
Yeah. So let's see. Someone here asked whether Khan Academy or IXL has specific material for the SHSAT. It does not. They don't have like a specific list of things that they recommend studying for the SHSAT, if that's what you're preparing for. But their materials are aligned to the New York State Learning Standards, and that's what's important. You want to find resources that help you prepare for questions that are tied to those learning standards, because that's what the SHSAT is based on.
Yeah, I'm going to drop a bunch of Khan Academy links into the chat right now because there is grade 6, 7, 8 specific stuff, especially on the math side. So give me 2 seconds to do that while you continue.
Let's see, are there any other highlights that we could share from our meetings with the director at the Office of Assessment? Let's see. Oh, so the two practice tests that are going to be released later this spring, the director basically told me that if the material on those practice tests had never been released to the public, he would be comfortable using those tests as the official test this fall. So basically, what that means is what we're going to see on the two practice tests that we can expect to be released soon is a very good example of what students can expect to see on the day of the test, the real test this year.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that Kenny and I are not spies, and we did not sign an NDA. So as much as we may have learned to whatever, there's still a lot we don't know. And in fact, that's the reason we're doing this session. So to answer what else he said, we're telling you what he said. So that's we're trying to be transparent. So
Let's see, we have another question here about homeschoolers and whether they should register for the 8th grade SHSAT or the 9th grade SHSAT because it's maybe unclear which grade they are being homeschooled in. Greg, do you want to field this one?
I don't know the answer to that. And I
Yeah,
categorize this
that's
under what I
probably a
call,
question that you should ask the
yeah,
family
extenuating
welcome center
circumstances.
or the Office of Enrollment. Yeah.
Right. This is also true for students who are coming from outside the United States and coming into the New York City public school system. This has to be something you ask the DOE directly.
Right. Let's see here. Someone asked if the computers have a touchpad or mouse, and the Chromebooks do have a touchpad. It's not clear if all students will also be given a mouse to use. Of course, iPads don't normally come with a mouse standard. So that's something that we'll have to wait and see from the DOE what they announce. Let's see, somebody asked what is hotspot? Hotspot is one type of question that could appear on this year's test. It basically involves having students highlight their answers, and there could be multiple answers that are correct.
Okay, so I dropped the top level links to the Khanacademy sections on math that you should really be looking at. And if you know the last three is unit 9, 10, and so on, those get iffy that they're on the SHSAT. And if they are, they're really on the SHSAT 9 and not the 8. Right? Again, don't be going into Khanacademy under the SAT section, and don't be going into Khanacademy under the Algebra 1 section. Right? That's overkill, and you're going to start studying stuff that's not going to be on the exam. The exam's challenging enough without going into places that you don't know. If you love test prep and you're just a bookworm and all this other stuff, go for it. But if you goes to prepare for the SHSAT, stay focused, right? There's no point like I could argue if you learn Spanish, it would help you English, right? But that would not be a reasonable thing to do. So it's the same thing here. Somebody just popped up. What is the SRT? It's the Student Resource Tool, or is that what S means again? Yeah.
Student Readiness Tool.
And it's a link. If you look at the very top of the chat, the first link Kenny gave was to an FAQ from the DOE, and it includes the link to the SRT. We could probably include that link again right here too, though. Let's see. Yeah, I'll drop it right here.
All right, so while you're dropping that link, Greg, I'm also going to drop the links to our websites so that everyone can take a look at what we offer as far as tutoring services, if that's a route that you'd like to pursue.
And as well, somebody's dropped in the chat, not the Q&A. If there is a computer problem, will there be on-site technical support? All right, so I did raise this to the DOE about emergency plans, catastrophes, and all this other stuff. They are running through scenarios, preparing for something, which is great. Remember, on an emergency, though, you can't plan for everything. and this is a long journey. They're not ignorant of it, so they are trying to figure out other ways around it. And again, that gets into the beauty of the Chromebooks and all that other stuff like that. But they have test stressed some things. They are aware of if there was Wi-Fi limitations in certain schools and locations, they are on it. So there's issues involving all that. So, and then if I think if we go back to that question, where was it? If I change the question, it says, if there is a computer problem, will there be on-site technical support? I'm going to change the question to be, if there was a problem with the paper-based exam, will there be technical support? So I think we have to recognize that the paper-based exam was not a panacea. A lot could have gone wrong with the paper-based exam, and in fact did, right? Those are things that kind of fall to the wayside. But there's things about paper-based exams getting lost, paper-based exams being scored wrong, things like that. So this is not a computer-specific thing. Now, can something go wrong? Yeah. Can something go wrong to thousands of kids at a time? Yes. But so they're on it, they're planning for it. And if we just keep thinking about the worst questions, we're never going to kind of get past some of it. So we do need to kind of come out of this on a positive note. I'll kind of give a little bit of my perspective. This is not perfect, but I'm actually excited about it. So the more I looked at the SRT and the more I went for the different kind of TEIs, I was like, wow, this is almost an opportunity to put a new dimension into the exam taking process. Right? It's not perfect, but guess what? No, the paper-based exam wasn't perfect either. There's some students. There's actually a whole number of problems that can occur with the paper-based exam. I mean, at a student level, some students write too big, so they need a lot of scrap paper. Some students, they forget when there's a 2-column passage to read the second column, right? So the paper-based exam has a lot of problems that people just make believe don't exist. So the computer is going to solve some of those. Is it going to have its own set of problems? Most likely, right? So just like we dealt with the paper-based exam problems, we'll just deal with the computer ones.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining me tonight. If anyone has any further questions.
Thanks for joining me too.
If anyone has any further questions, you can feel free to reach out to either of us through our websites. Our emails are up there. And again, we'll be sending out a recording of tonight's webinar to everyone that registered, and we'll post it in some other places as well.
And definitely keep in touch with us. Again, we're the two guys on top of this, and we're going to stay on top of it. And if you have any extra questions, like Kenny said, we're going to do some sort of follow-up, maybe at least one. So this will be a good place to be to get the information on top of the DOE releasing the exam, hopefully this month. So, and then we'll just work forward from there. This is a kind of a milestone that we can get this far to even talk about it. So that's wonderful, right? So, and the DOE, I am grateful that we got to get connections with them. We all complain about the DOE, but we have information. We just spent an hour and a half or something talking about things. So that's wonderful.
Have a great night, everyone.
All right.